You're listening to No PC Allowed, aka No Political Correctness Allowed, and I am Mac Iverson. We live in a time when the glaring non-controversial should not be controversial, but sadly, it is. We're talking about tariffs. It amazes me how otherwise intelligent, knowledgeable people could be so strangely and dishonestly, it seems, be against Trump's tariffs. The economics behind his tariffs is not rocket science, not even remotely so. Libtards hating them, I get. But why do so many rhinos and neocons rage against them? Here's the reason why. It's simply because no one over the past several decades in this country has spoken seriously of using tariffs to benefit all Americans, but particularly the forgotten man. The forgotten man is simply not on the radar screen of not only the deep state, but those sensitive Democrats who supposedly had the backs of the forgotten working man. You know, the ones who sweat for a living? The forgotten man has been, well, forgotten. Let's boil this down to the bare basics, so that when you hear all the clutching of their pearls ninnies out there crying about, oh, how perfectly horrible Trump's economy is, then you can pop the top on another beer and lie back in your hammock and not have to worry about what the nattering nabobs of negativity are all nitpicking and bitching about. The reason why simple tariffs seems like such a threatening concept is because no one in American politics has had any real brawn on this topic. Everything comes down to simple math and human nature. That the tariffs will work is a no-brainer because of our human nature. People and nations are largely motivated by the fear of missing out on something spectacular. A trade war will ruin all that excitement, and Trump knows this. But the enemies of the people, or the billionaires in the World Economic Forum and the Council on Foreign Relations, certainly do not want tariffs because that makes the middle class strong, which weakens their anti-middle class, anti-American trillion-dollar investments. Trump's plan is for a reconciliation of massive funds to help pay for massive tax cuts possibly as early as next year. This will be achieved by shifting the tax burden to foreigners. Among many other services, our Navy protects the world's shipping lanes. We should have help internationally to pay for that. But there is resistance to all this reform. This is the division of Wall Street versus Main Street. Government spending leads to inflation. That affects regular Americans across the board. But when inflation increases, stocks inflate too. That's why Wall Street doesn't mind inflation at all. They even welcome it. To help erase this deadly division, Trump is insisting that China must decouple from its sick and twisted relationship with America. This is Trump's ultimate goal, to unite the entire world against the CCP. China is the most imbalanced economy in the world. They have massive wealth, but far greater numbers are living in abject poverty. China is the surplus country. They export 5 times more than the United States exports to China. What does this mean for the USA? It means China will suffer far more than the USA with these new tariffs, thus creating huge leverage for a great American comeback. The modern-day money changers do not ever want to lose their money, so why would they allow a trade war to happen? I admit many of the uber-wealthy are truly insane. Look at the George and Alex Soros mob and their proxies. But I really don't think China is prepared for a total meltdown of the country. The average Chinese citizen is not a happy camper. The vast majority are living in unspeakable poverty and oppression with no individual rights. So any major stressor could mean a complete blowout of the Xi Jinping communist-fascist regime. Therefore, despite some obligatory saber-rattling, I do not believe they will even risk it. Just one major global conflict may cause China to completely implode. For that reason alone, China, after some kabuki dance shows of token resistance, should play along with America. However, cornered animals can be unpredictable and deadly. That is exactly what China is today. The great fear of most tariff critics is that all countries will abandon free trade, which is absurd. Free trade is fantastic, as long as it's fair. Trump is looking for a massive flip globally, meaning that his tariffs will jumpstart benefits for all countries. They will follow America's lead of lowering or eliminating many tariffs because reciprocal means they will almost have to. That is called American leadership. Trump likes to use tariff proposals as bargaining chips, and he likes to start at the most extreme position and negotiate down from there. That's the art of the deal. Canada, as America's 51st state, is an obvious joke, but he says it like it's not a joke. So he softens his threat with humor, which is very New York of him. So the serious threat only sounds funny in a 5-second soundbite. But overall, the threat sounds so outrageous that no one's really threatened by it. So he gains tremendous advantage by saying something without really saying it. This is Machiavellian, of course, and New York City was ground zero, being full of mobsters who molded that entire culture back in the day around such business tricks of the trade. At the same time, Trump is able to ingratiate himself with Joe Sixpack, who loves that kind of regular guy masculine teasing humor. And no wonder. That's also the core of his voting base. The last thing any sane president wants to do is oversee a recession, so Trump hates anything that stands in the way of fair free trade, as opposed to America grab your ankles, totally free trade with no oversight or stipulations. There are many other unfair trade practices, not just tariffs. This was very curious. Why was Trump wanting to enact tariffs all at once with all countries? Number one, he wanted tariff chaos in order to isolate China. First, it was all about fairness. But when the bond markets were threatened by China in retaliation, which in turn threatened the global stock markets, well then, all bets are off. Now it's mostly about China. Currently, all countries are getting a pause on tariffs, but China is now stuck with a 145% tariff. It's about weakening the great commie red dragon. Trump is capable of amazing flexibility while negotiating a hairpin turn above a steep cliff with a 90-degree drop. In addition, as a flanking maneuver, Trump is now saying to China, hands off Panama. So China has to deal with a major dream of controlling 5% of the world's trade through that alleyway from slipping through the greasy green talons. At the same time, Trump is making master magician maneuvers toward Greenland, forcing China's focus there as well. China has always been playing chess, and now that the sleeping giant of America is rousing itself with high-grade caffeine and cracking its knuckles, China is starting to sweat. In the beginning, friends and foes alike were being targeted by Trump to create negotiating leverage, to create a domino effect once things started going America's way again. Once one country falls, they will all fall. That's because these are only reciprocal tariffs. Trump is leveling the playing field, so instead of using the abuses of wage suppression, currency manipulation, and draconian regulation, these countries simply have to sell fairly to the USA, or not play with us at all, thus missing out on all the economic growth that comes with it. That is our very fair, very simple negotiating position. So anyone starting a trade war over the U.S. for simply wanting to be a good trading neighbor makes no sense. Some countries like Israel, Taiwan, and Cambodia immediately took steps to cut tariffs of U.S. imports in order to maintain a close relationship with their number one ally. Recently, the EU Commission said a zero-to-zero trade deal with the U.S. was just fine. This may be premature, but wouldn't that erase all tariffs? Isn't that what zero-to-zero emphatically means? And isn't that exactly what all free traders who hate tariffs want? And the EU isn't like little Cambodia. It's a massive conglomerate of 27 first-world nations. As of now, the U.S. appears to be settling on 10% tariffs on all nations with a 90-day pause except for China, which has a huge 145% tariff from America. What does this mean? It means that China is the major economic enemy of America, and they must be reined in. This isn't really about tariffs. It's about exercising the golden rule of trade, that being simple reciprocity. Tariffs, if done right, are all about being fair. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule is from the Bible. Trump's Christian focus comes from doing, taking action on a global scale. If tariffs are so bad, then why aren't the economies of many countries who use them just crumbling? Many have higher tariffs than what Trump wants to impose. American ignoramus college graduates working in the fake news media look to these crybaby countries who are saying that the same tariffs they're using will be terrible for the world economy if also used by America. If so, then why is the EU considering caving into Trump's demands? Why is that? If reciprocal tariffs are so unbelievably horrible for the global economy. They only say that because they've been spoiled for many decades by American monetary policy. If you cut off your spoiled brats from Daddy's Trust Fund payouts, then your little angels suddenly become Eric and Lyle Menendez. Milton Friedman said tariffs were minor in the Great Depression. Most of the Depression came from a leftist big government monetary policy bullying the middle class and poor people into submission. Is it really a tariff if it's just a reciprocal tax? By the way, the tariff, so-called, isn't a tax against Americans, it's against other countries. But they can stop that tax at any time. They're not forced to take it. So it's not America's tariff. It's China's tariff. Or Canada's tariff. They're the ones who tariffed us. Don't buy into the fake news industrial complex's spider web of lies. And none of this is complex. It is stupid simple, and probably nothing to be afraid of. I say probably because we are dealing with people's perceptions. Never mind that everyone is trying to look at this objectively. Selfish human emotions like fear and greed have always plagued humanity. Therefore, wars and conflict have always existed. But to make this glaringly simple, as soon as any country quits playing games with America's economy, we quit playing games with theirs. And then both sides benefits from an even playing field. The fake news industrial complex is banking on the American voter to be a guaranteed ignoramus well into 2026 for the next election of our lifetimes. They're using the same old song and dance from the same old tired playbook. All they got are some silly scare tactics from history, like the Smoot-Hawley Act that was not enacted until 1931, But the stock market crash was in 1929. Even though those tariffs were about 60%, they did not cause the crash and did not make the depression appreciably worse than it was. It was made horrible by FDR's foolish programs and leftist monetary policy of refusing to allow natural economic forces to take hold so as to recover quickly. Back then, the tariffs were deflationary. Consumer prices crashed, so they did not cause inflation. Today, America is a much larger economy and can handle these tariffs much better, so a highly unlikely trade war would hurt smaller countries much more. Still, it is a high-risk play. Our collective outcome depends on human nature. Trump gets it. What do all these countries have to gain if they're stuck on stupid tariffs hurt America? Who wants to hurt America more than anyone else? China. But does China have the leverage? Again, the vast majority of that country lives in poverty. Not just poverty, but horrendous poverty, which is almost impossible for Americans to even imagine. We can know about it, but we cannot fully feel it. Its unpleasantness forces us to look away from China's self-degradation of their own people, whom the privileged communist class of billionaires no longer see themselves a part of. Permanent tariffs may be bad for all countries unless we remove the income tax, which replaced the need for tariffs in 1913. That's assuming we won't move over to a far better national sales tax, which should be a very fair tax of maybe 5 or 6% on only what you buy. Hate paying taxes? Don't buy much stuff and you won't have to pay much at all. That's a great idea because it will cause Americans to barter and never surrender using cash for even greater tax savings. To avoid tax fraud, the income tax should still be an optional choice instead of the sales tax, under certain circumstances. But wide use of cash will ensure that we never lose our freedoms to a one-world currency that can too easily be controlled digitally. Look, here's the main problem. A cashless system equals political persecution made easy. Wasn't it bad enough with the persecution of the January 6th patriots and the weaponization of the Justice Department against President Trump? All they have to do is put an expiration date on or even turn off your digital currency entirely if you're not woke enough. That could easily happen if you give up using cash entirely. Such monetary terrorism turns government bullying and tyranny into a perfected science. This is just basic common sense. With a national sales tax, if you don't buy much stuff, that will make poverty for serious people somewhat difficult to achieve. It actually becomes somewhat difficult to become poor, so in turn, that will make the welfare state virtually non-existent. That's the job of the church anyway, to take care of the poor. All this will make people of all races, classes, and creeds auto-magically conservative. We will all become much more independent and self-sufficient and conservative and happier across the board. That will happen when Americans are no longer pathetic victims standing on street corners with their hands stretched out. I mean that figuratively and literally. This is Trump's ultimate plan. Tariffs aren't the end all, just a means to that end. 100 years ago, federal government spending was 2.7% of GDP. It has grown by 25% of GDP, 10 times bigger than 100 years ago. But does it have to be this way? Of course not. Back then, government was much smaller, so it needed far less money. Therefore, tariffs alone were enough money. No income tax was needed. The worst-case scenario is that all these countries play along and no tariffs will be needed going into the future. But we can still get rid of the income tax. Just replace it with one flat national sales tax. Then we could possibly get rid of the IRS. Here's a reality check. Replacing the income tax with permanent tariffs may well be just a pipe dream. In a competitive, high-tech, complex world, we need strong, well-financed federal government. The bottom line is this. Free trade cannot survive unless it's fair. But the greatest threat to Trump's tariffs is still lawfare in the courts. With Trump's success, the parties have flipped completely, it seems. The Republican Party is far more concerned about the people. The demon rats are more concerned with placating the world's multi-billionaires with their collective trillion-dollar investments into insane woke garbage. The demon rat party, as we know it, wouldn't exist without these billionaires, they being their biggest donors. The possibility of a global trade war isn't likely because it isn't rational. Only if Trump is perceived as weak would a trade war ever come about because other nations will think pushback will succeed against the USA. But it obviously won't work on Trump because he's a strong leader, and the world already knows that, if they're being honest. Tariffs create jobs, which leads to the economic boom, which leads to more tax revenue. But does it create inflation? The consumer always pays for any tariff because it's just another name for a tax. And we must all know that corporations don't pay any taxes because they automatically get passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices. So, tariffs do add to inflation, but that's not the major cause of inflation. So to counter any inflation caused by tariffs, we must ask, what is DOGE all about? Cutting government spending massively, which is a massive anti-inflationary move. So increased tariffs and decreased spending both counter and thus cancel each other out. So we're even. right? Wrong. For the forgotten American, it gets way better than even that. Government spending is far and away the biggest cause of inflation. Tariffs don't even come close. What was the inflation rate in 1913 when the income tax was made into constitutional law and tariffs were the main way the government made its money? Only about 2%. Most items were priced around $1 then. So something for sale for $1 in 1912 cost about $1.02 in 1913. Look at the rate of inflation under Brandon just a year ago when government spending was near its all-time highest. The actual inflation rate was about 20%. 2% versus 20%. There is no comparison. And all that inflation was created without American-imposed tariffs. The reason Trump is so excited about tariffs, after all, it's his favorite word in the dictionary, is because of number one, creating jobs, number two, a long-term economic boom will result. This boom will be global, by the way, because many countries will be forced to play along if they know what's good for them. Again, we export to China 1/5 of what they export to us. So them raising tariffs on us does the U.S. very little harm. As of today, China has been saddled with an enormous 145% tariff. So something has to give, and soon. They're hoping internal pressure from the crybaby libtard voters will intimidate Trump. China, on the other hand, has no such internal pressure. They do, but they just ignore their dissidents and imprisons and even tortures them if they start to get too big for the britches. But if the Chinese economy just gets 40 or 50% worse, then it's possibly all over for China. Their decades of ignoring individual rights has rotted out China's soul and foundation of stability to the very core. Trump wants to break China. I say amen to that. This is all about the art of brinkmanship. It's bold and it's ballsy. These tariffs mark the start of Phase 2 of making America great again. Phase 1 of empowering the free world in the first place started after World War II when America created the Marshall Plan to make the free world rich to compete with ambitious communism. That wealth creation phase was highly successful, but now that phase is over. Now it's time for America to regain her throne as the world leader in all areas, socially, economically, militarily, as well as morally based upon a strong Christian foundation. Therefore, Europe isn't lacking a wealth problem, it has a Mohammedan problem, and that's because their secular economic success, brought to them by America, has corrupted their culture to an obscene degree. The same will happen to America if we allow these Mohammedan immigrants to take over America. Europeans don't want to get married and have babies, so they imported millions of Mohammedans to wait on their tables and clean their toilets. It may be well too late for Europe, but if they can somehow copy America, that could empower the middle class there as well. Then they won't need mass immigration anymore. If you thought Trump getting reelected was a miracle, wait till you see what's coming for Europe. Only a God-sized miracle can save them. So start praying for Europe to wake up and pray without ceasing right now. Time is not on their side or ours. You've been listening to No PC Allowed. I am Mac Iverson. We will meet again next week and every week.